Okay, so the test will be on Monday. Mrs. Barrs should have just shown you about the last 12 minutes or so of the Great Gatsby movie, and you should have in your hand right now a packet, should have about 4 pages in it, and you just read together the Chapter 9 summary, those both columns of that Chapter 9 summary. You have also just turned to the Great Gatsby Quiz Chapter 9, and she gave you some time to fill in some responses there. So I'd like to go through that together just to be sure that we have the correct answers there. So grab a pen if you don't have that, and let's look at the Chapter 9 quiz that is in your packet. The first question asks, who becomes responsible for answering questions and taking care of the details surrounding Gatsby's death? You know from watching the video that that answer is Nick. Nick tries getting in touch with Daisy and finds out she is gone. He tries Meyer Wolfsheim. Nobody wants to be responsible for Gatsby. And number 2 then, why hadn't Daisy called Gatsby the day after the accident? We find out that she and her husband have left on a trip. Number 3, who arrives from Minnesota? We see his father, Henry Gads. Gatsby's dad comes, if you're looking in your book, on page 172. Page 172. Page 175 is where Gatsby's father comes. Gatsby's father, Henry Gads, arrives from Minnesota. Number 4, what was Klipspringer's only concern? Not that Gatsby was dead, but page 177, about 2/3 of the way down on 177. What I called up about was a pair of shoes I left there. I wondered if it'd be too much trouble to have the butler send them on. So it's all he cares about is that his shoes are missing. On the bottom of 177, turn there please. The last 4 lines on 177. Nick says, after he'd tried Daisy, he'd tried Wolfsheim, and then Klipspringer calls. After that, I felt a certain shame for Gatsby. One gentleman to whom I telephoned implied that Gatsby got what he deserved. So he's feeling like it's him and Gatsby against the world, that he feels like he is going to stand up for Gatsby and take care of him here at the end. Number 5, why wouldn't Wolfsheim come to Gatsby's funeral? On page 180, Wolfsheim says, I can't get mixed up in it. Let us learn to show our friendship for a man when he's alive, not after he's dead. After that, my rule is to let everything else alone. So Wolfsheim just says in number 5 he can't get mixed up in it. Then in the movie you saw the scene in the car on the way to the funeral of Mr. Gads, Gatsby's dad, reading this list of resolves, this schedule. And that goes along with number 6 on your quiz here. Like Ben Franklin and Horatio Alger, Gatsby kept a list of his resolves, and what do they represent? So that's on page 181. It's just his plan for making his dreams come true. Just like he had a plan now in his adulthood to win the love of Daisy, he also had a plan when he was a very young man, a plan to become successful and to make his dreams come true. Then you see him asked in the movie, and we see it here in the book also, why, number 7, why does Nick tell Mr. Gatz that he was a close friend of Gatsby's? Probably simply to make his father feel better. We know that Nick's only known Gatsby this summer. He probably doesn't consider himself a very good friend of his, but just to make this poor old sad man feel better, he tells him he's a close friend. Then if we go down to number 12, we'll skip around a little bit here. On the bottom of page 182 in your book, the bottom of 182, it tells us what time the funeral procession arrived at the cemetery and then who was involved. So we see Mr. Gads and the minister and Nick in the limo. And then he tells us a little later 4 or 5 servants and the postman from West Egg all arrived. And then as we started through the cemetery, he sees one more man, and that is Owl Eyes, that owl-eyed man that he'd found marveling over Gatsby's books in the library one night 3 months before. So we have just maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 or 9 people at the most at Gatsby's funeral. Now I want you to think back to all the way back to the start of chapter 4, when you remember reading those 3 or 4 pages full of people's names that Nick wrote down, all those people who came night after night all summer long to Gatsby's, and how ironic it is here now in his death that none of those people shows up. No one is there for him at his funeral. And what a sad statement that is about, really about the difference between the classes, the East Eggers, the West Eggers, the old money, the new money that don't mix. There's no such thing as moving between social classes here. Number 9 asks, why does Nick say that this has been a story of the West? Now remember we talked about how Nick has gone, he's back in the Midwest now telling this story. On the bottom of page 184, bottom of 184, about 6 lines from the bottom, Nick says, I see now that this has been a story of the West after all. Tom and Gatsby, Daisy and Jordan and I were all Westerners, and perhaps we possessed some deficiency in common which made us subtly unadaptable to Eastern life. So the question asks, why does Nick say this has been a story of the West? All the main characters were from the Midwest, the West or the Midwest. And so Nick is suggesting that maybe something about their character, maybe something about the way that we are raised in the Midwest makes us unsuitable for life in the East Coast, that shallow materialistic life of the super rich that Gatsby has been with here this summer. Number 10, page 185, and here Nick sort of reminds us again about why he's leaving. He says, the bottom of 184, even when the East excited me the most, even when I was most keenly aware of its superiority to the broad, sprawling, swollen towns beyond the Ohio, even then the East always had a quality for me of distortion. The middle of 185, the very middle paragraph, after Gatsby's death, the East was haunted for me like that. Distorted beyond my eyes' power of correction. So when the blue smoke of brittle leaves was in the air and the wind blew the wet laundry stiff on the line, I decided to come back home, to leave the East. But he feels like there's one more thing that he has to do before he leaves, and that is number 10. Who does he see before he went back home? The answer to that is on page 185. He goes to see Jordan. And Jordan, remember that Jordan couldn't bear being at a disadvantage. So page 185, the bottom of the page, she tells Nick that she's engaged. And Nick says, I doubted that, though there were several suitors that she could have married, but I doubted that she really was engaged. And then Nick says, angry and half in love with her and tremendously sorry, I turned away from her. So he felt that this was something, this chapter in his life, he felt like he had to close out face to face, because the last time they had talked was the day of Gatsby's death, when Jordan had called him at the office and they hung up on each other. Number 11, what did Nick find out about Daisy when he ran into Tom one day? Now, in the movie, you see they have Nick and Jordan seeing each other one last time, and they also have Nick and Tom and Daisy seeing each other in the hotel one last time. But it's a little bit different in the book. In the book, Nick runs into Tom Buchanan on a New York street, and Tom tries to shake hands with Nick, but Nick won't shake his hand. The top of 187, Tom asks, what's the matter, Nick? Do you object to shaking hands with me? Yes, you know what I think of you. You're crazy, Nick. Crazy as hell. I don't know what's the matter with you. And Nick says, Tom, what did you say to Wilson that afternoon? He stared at me without a word, and I knew I had guessed right about those missing hours. So we surmised, we inferred that George Wilson had to have gone to Tom to find out where the car was, who the car belonged to, and Nick thought that all along also. In the middle of page 187, Tom says, I told him the truth. He came to the door while we were getting ready to leave, and when I sent word down that we weren't in, he tried to force his way upstairs. He was crazy enough to kill me if I hadn't told him who owned the car. What if I did tell him? That fellow had it coming to him. He threw dust into your eyes just like he did in Daisy's, but he was a tough one. He ran over Myrtle like you'd run over a dog and never even stopped his car. There was nothing I could say except the one unutterable fact that it wasn't true. So we are to assume, number 11, we're to assume that Daisy never told Tom the truth. Nick says, I couldn't forgive Tom or like him, but I saw that what he had done was to him entirely justified. It was all very careless and confused. They were careless people, Tom and Daisy. They smashed up things and creatures and then returned back to their money or their vast carelessness or whatever it was that kept them together and let other people clean up the mess that they had made. And that is exactly what Nick has to do now. He has to clean up the mess of Gatsby's death. So whether we believe that Tom knew that Daisy wasn't driving or not, that's kind of up to interpretation, but he is going to make sure that people don't know that he thinks Daisy, that people don't know that he knows that Daisy was driving or not. Okay, so that's through chapter 11. I'd like you to turn over to the back side of that sheet, turn it over, the other side of the quiz. We can come back and look at number 13. We sort of addressed that on the back side of your quiz. Where it says number 2, the last page of the novel, which is still considered one of the most important passages in all of American literature. So that would be pages 188 and 189, the last 2 pages. And Nick talks about the very last night that he spends in New York. He goes over to Gatsby's house. And let's fill in the blanks here on the sheet that you have in your packet. On his last night in West Egg before moving back to Minnesota, Nick walks over to Gatsby's empty mansion and it erases an obscene word, you saw that in the video, that someone has written on the steps. He sprawls out on the beach behind Gatsby's house and looks up. As the moon rises, he imagines the island with no houses and considers what it must have looked like to the explorers who discovered the New World centuries before. He imagines that America was once a goal for dreamers and explorers. Fill that in. For dreamers and explorers, just as Daisy was for Gatsby. He pictures the green land of America as the green light shining from Daisy's dock. And he muses that Gatsby, whose wealth and success so closely echoed the American dream, Gatsby failed to realize that the dream had already ended, that his goals had become hollow and empty. Nick, it should say, Nick senses that people everywhere are motivated by similar dreams and a desire to move forward into a future in which their dreams are realized. Nick envisions their struggles to create that future as boats moving in a body of water against the current that inevitably carries them back into the past. And that's the very last sentence of the book. So we beat on, boats against the current, borne or carried back ceaselessly into the past. Fitzgerald has suggested that next paragraph, that America in the 1920s lost its way, deliberately or inevitably. America became a shallow, materialistic nation, and the dream for which people fought about turned into a cheap substitute for the real thing. What kept Americans going as individuals was the belief in that dream. So they struggled like Gatsby to attain it. But they were like boats against the current, carried back ceaselessly into the past. Americans row and row against the current of time, trying to get back to that dream, bearing themselves backward like Gatsby, who believed that the past could be repeated. What Fitzgerald seems to be criticizing is not the American dream itself, but the corruption of the American dream. The corruption of the American dream. The energy that might have gone into the pursuit of noble goals was instead channeled into the pursuit of power and pleasure and a very showy but empty form of success. And that's that whole West Egg crowd. They pursued power, they pursued pleasure, but it was empty success. The Great Gatsby is not then just a book about the 1920s. It's a book about America, its promise and the betrayal of that promise. Throughout the book, Fitzgerald contrasted Gatsby the dreamer with the foul dust that preyed on his dream. The tragedy of Gatsby is that he still dreams the dream, but that he isn't wise enough or strong enough to see that Daisy's not worthy of his devotion and of his sacrifice. He can't step back to see where he's gone wrong, but Nick can. Now, that statement again, Fitzgerald contrasted Gatsby the dreamer with the foul dust that preyed on his dream. I want you to turn all the way back to page 6 in chapter 1. And we said we'd come back and look at this page when we finish the book. Look at the middle of page 6, and it's highlighted, it's marked in your book, I'm sure. The very middle sentence on page 6. Only Gatsby, the man who gives his name to this book, was exempt from my reaction. Gatsby, who represented everything for which I have an unaffected scorn. Remember, Nick didn't agree with the way that Gatsby made his money illegally, but he says that Gatsby had an extraordinary gift for hope. 6 lines from the bottom here. A romantic readiness such as I've never found in any other person, and which is not likely I'll ever find again. No, Gatsby turned out all right at the end. Now, even though when Nick is writing this, Gatsby is dead, Nick says Gatsby turned out all right at the end. Gatsby believed in his dream to the very, very end. He says it's what preyed on Gatsby, what foul dust floated in the wake of Gatsby's dreams. The foul dust was Nick and Daisy, primarily Nick and Daisy, the foul dust that flowed in the wake of Gatsby's dreams that temporarily closed out my interest in the sorrows and elations of men. So remember, this whole thing is a flashback. Nick is talking on page 6 at the very start of the book what it was that made him return to the East, not want to hear about anybody's problems anymore. So back on your worksheet again, the bottom half of the worksheet. Here we have the last 3 or 4 sentences of the book again. Gatsby believed in the green light, the orgastic future that year by year recedes before us. It eluded us then, but that's no matter. Tomorrow we'll run faster, stretch out our arms farther, and one fine morning. So we beat on, boats against the current, borne back ceaselessly into the past. There's a lot going on in those last 4 sentences. Gatsby saw more than just a green light on a pole at the end of the dock. It's a symbol, no? A symbol of how we all look at the future. He believed in what that light represented. Look to it what's not said. The 3rd sentence that says simply, and one fine morning. What happened one fine morning? Did we make pancakes? No. Again, we are all like Gatsby. If our spouse or our better half doesn't understand us, or our boss doesn't see our talents, or our teacher doesn't see our talents, well, one fine morning we'll show them. At our best moments, our future is golden. Yet year by year, we have less future, and the current is always against us. If we're not golden this year, when will we be golden? The last line is like a punch because Fitzgerald gives us emphasis by giving sound to the sentence. Listen to that sentence again. So we beat on, boats against the current, borne back. See those 4 words that begin with B, a good use of alliteration there. They give the sentence extra oomph, shoving us into those last 4 words, ceaselessly to the past. We all keep getting stuck in the past. That line, too, gives the whole novel an extra bittersweet moment. We're there in the past of the story and the present of our lives. Life is both bleak and beautiful. Now, talking about that golden idea, back in your worksheet packet on Chapter 9, at the bottom of the discussion questions, underneath Chapter 9 of your discussion question packet, there is a poem here by Robert Frost called Nothing Gold Can Stay. And if you remember, in 8th grade, you read the novel The Outsiders. And part of the phrase there, part of that study was that nothing gold can stay. And if you look at that poem, it's analyzed on the right-hand side in your packet for you. The poem reads, nature's first green is gold, her hardest hue or color to hold. Her early leaf is a flower, but only so an hour. Then leaf subsides to leaf, so Eden sank to grief. So dawn goes down to day, nothing gold can stay. On the right-hand side are just short little summaries or an analysis of what each line means. The idea that nature's first green is gold, youth is a treasure. that youth is a hard time in your life to control, but then that youth and beauty don't last. Her early leaf's in a flower, but only for an hour. Youth and beauty don't last. Leaf subsides to leaf, time goes on. So Eden sank to grief. To grief. Adam and Eve were given everything, but perfection does not exist. Dawn goes down today, the final stage of life. Nothing gold can stay. So nothing good lasts. That idea about Gatsby hanging on to the past. Newness never lasts. Nothing good ever lasts forever. So it's important that we accept each part of our life, accept that each part of our life passes by far too quickly, so we have to cherish each moment that we have. That last star at the bottom, perfection is not a realistic concept. And in Gatsby's eyes, Daisy was perfect, and look where that all came out. Look what happened there. Okay, so we've gone through that interpretation then of the last couple pages of the book. Filled in those blanks. Okay, the next page of your packet should be a symbols and themes in the Great Gatsby. It looks like this, symbols and themes in the Great Gatsby. Be sure to read through this very carefully. There will be a lot of questions on the test from here with regard to this page talks about East Egg, West Egg, the Valley of Ashes, Dr. T.J. Eckelberg's eyes, the green light. What does owl eyes symbolize? Gatsby's shirts, what are they a symbol of? Dan Cody's yacht. So just be sure you read through that very carefully. And then I need to grab one note here, just a minute. Okay, so to prepare for the test then, be sure that you look at the information that's on the homework page. There are tons of links to study materials. One big portion of the test will be on matching. Matching characters, matching some of these symbols and themes in the packet that you're getting today, matching the locations. So match the character, the symbol, the object to its description. Another part of the test will be quotations. So be sure that you go through the quotes that are in this packet on the back of the Chapter 9 summary sheet. Also be sure you look at there's a couple of links on the homework page about quotations. The quotation section will be a matching who said it. Here's the quote, who said it, but it'll also be some short fill in the blank with some key words missing. So like if one of them said, can't repeat the blank, well, of course you can. You would fill in the word past. You could go back to your old Kia quizzes. I'll turn all the answers on, so you log into Kia and click on English 3 as your class. You'll be able to see the questions there. Multiple choice will not be the picky kinds of questions that we had on each quiz, but kind of more thematic questions. So again, multiple choice, fill in the blank, some true and false, but kind of more broadly based about the book than just the specific questions that we had on the test. So again, to study, go over the links on the homework page, go through your discussion question packet, even reading that first page of the packet about the doubleness, the two-ness that you see in the novel. Go through this packet that you just got in class today. If you have any questions, come and see me tomorrow, which will be Friday. And then if you know you're going to be gone on test day on Monday, don't go home for Thanksgiving without taking this test. Plan to take it Tuesday, or we will also be here Wednesday for in-service, but just don't go for a full week without taking the test. If you have any other questions, email me or stop by to see me on Friday. That should be everything. I think I'm going to leave next a couple of short review videos to look at to finish out class with today. And then with the time that's remaining with Mrs. Barse, please go onto the homework page and start going through the links, some of the review activities to the links for review for the Great Gatsby test.